Dr. Kilo had seen many strange creatures in his 20 years as a veterinarian, but nothing had prepared him for what walked through his clinic doors. That morning the beast was massive beyond anything he could imagine, standing almost as tall as the ceiling. When it sat down, its fur was deep black, like the space between stars, and when it opened its mouth to yawn, Dr. Kilo could see teeth longer than his fingers. Each tooth looked sharp enough to cut through metal. The creature's eyes were bright yellow and seemed to glow with an inner fire that made the doctor take several steps backward. But what scared Dr. Kilo the most was not the size of the creature or its terrible teeth. It was how quiet it moved despite weighing more than his entire examining table. The beast walked without making a single sound. Its massive paws touched the floor like whispers, and when it breathed, the air barely moved around its huge chest. Sitting next to this walking nightmare was a young human male who looked completely relaxed. The human had short black hair and wore simple clothes that were clean but nothing fancy. He was reading something on a small device and occasionally reached over to scratch behind the creature's ears. The beast would lean into the touch and make a sound that might have been purring but sounded more like distant thunder. Other patients in the waiting room had noticed the new arrivals and were slowly moving as far away as possible. A family of small blue aliens pressed themselves against the wall near the emergency exit. Their large eyes never left the massive predator. A tall, thin creature with too many arms wrapped all of them around itself and started making clicking sounds that Dr. Kilo recognized as extreme fear. The air in the room began to smell different as various species released their natural alarms. Since Dr. Kilo's assistant Pip came running from the back room but stopped dead when he saw the beast. Pip was from a world where the largest predator was about the size of Dr. Kilo's hand. The poor assistant started changing colors rapidly, which was what his species did when they were terrified. His scales went from their normal green to bright yellow, then to deep purple and back again, so fast it was making everyone dizzy. The human looked up from his device and noticed how scared everyone was. He smiled in a way that seemed friendly, but Dr. Kilo was not sure if humans always meant what their faces showed. The young man stood up, and the creature immediately stood with him, moving like they were connected by invisible strings. "Come on, buddy, time for your checkup," the human said in a voice that was calm and gentle. The beast, which apparently had the harmless name Buddy, looked up at his human companion with what could only be described as love and trust. The creature's tail started moving back and forth, and each time it hit something there was a loud thump that made the whole building shake. Dr. Kilo realized you have to be the one to examine this monster, because Pip had turned completely white and was making small, squeaking sounds. He forced his forelegs to carry him toward the examination room, even though every instinct told him to run as far and as fast as possible. As they walked, Buddy kept looking around the clinic with curious eyes. He seemed interested in everything, but not in a threatening way. More like he was trying to understand this new place. The human kept one hand resting lightly on the creature's back and spoke to him in soft tones that seemed to keep the beasts calm. The examination room suddenly felt much smaller when Buddy walked into it. The creature looked around for a moment, then without any command from his human jumped up onto the metal examination table. The table groaned and bent slightly under his weight, but somehow held. The human's name was Tay, and he seemed completely unconcerned that his companion could probably bite Dr. Kilo in half without much effort. Kilo tried to remember his training. He had studied the anatomy of hundreds of different species and had treated everything from tiny, singing insects to massive space whales that lived in gas clouds, but those creatures had been brought to him unconscious or heavily sedated. This was the first time he had to examine something so deadly while it was awake and watching him. Buddy sat perfectly still on the table, his yellow eyes following Dr. Kilo's every movement. The creature's head was so large that when he turned to look at something, his whole body had to shift. The doctor could hear the beast breathing, and it sounded like wind moving through a cave. Each breath seemed controlled and purposeful. To notice how nervous the doctor was and started talking to try and help the situation. "Buddy is actually very gentle," he said while stroking the creature's massive head. "He looks scary, but he's really just a big sweet animal who wants to protect the people he loves." The way Tay spoke about Buddy was the same way other humans talked about much smaller and safer pets. Dr. Kilo found this hard to believe as he looked at claws that could tear through his offices, walls, and muscles that rippled under the beast's fur like steel cables. But he had to admit that Buddy was being remarkably patient. The creature had not made any threatening moves and seemed content to let a complete stranger approach him. The doctor slowly reached for his medical scanner, trying not to make any sudden movements. Buddy watched the device with interest but did not seem alarmed when Dr. Kilo held it near his body. The scanner immediately started showing readings that made the doctor's eyes go wide. Buddy's heart was larger than Dr. Kilo's entire torso and beat with the power of a small engine. His bone density was incredible, making his skeleton stronger than most metals. The creature's muscle fibers were unlike anything in Dr. Kilo's medical books, designed for explosive power and incredible endurance. But perhaps most amazing was Buddy's brain activity. The scans showed intelligence levels that were far higher than most species considered it normal for non-speaking animals. As Dr. Kilo continued his examination, he began to understand that he was not just looking at a dangerous predator. He was seeing a highly intelligent being who had chosen to trust both his human companion and now a complete stranger. The beast could have easily destroyed the entire clinic in seconds, but instead, he sat quietly and let the doctor work. This realization made Dr. Kilo both more frightened and more curious. How had humans managed to form such a bond with creatures that could kill them so easily? What kind of relationship could exist between two species that was so different, and most importantly, what did this say about humans themselves that they could earn the loyalty of such powerful beings? The examination continued with Buddy remaining perfectly cooperative while Dr. Kilo slowly began to see past his initial terror to the remarkable partnership between human and beast. Dr. Kilo forced himself to move closer to the examination table, even though his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his medical tools. The scanner in his primary hand kept beeping as it recorded Buddy's vital signs, while his other three hands fumbled with different instruments as he worked. Dr. Kilo discovered things about Buddy that made him even more terrified. The creature's jaw muscles were powerful enough to crush starship hull plating. His reflexes were faster than most military pilots, and his senses were so sharp he could probably detect movement from several buildings away. Yet here, Buddy sat as still as a statue, letting a complete stranger poke and prod him with strange devices to watch the doctor work, and seemed to understand how scared he was, so he started talking about how he and Buddy had first met. His voice was calm and friendly, like he was telling a story to old friends rather than trying to keep a nervous alien from fainting. 3 years ago, Tay had been part of a human exploration team that was mapping new worlds for possible colonies. Their ship had been flying over a planet that looked beautiful from space with green forests and blue oceans, but when they tried to land, something went wrong with their engines and they crashed hard into the jungle. Most of Tay's crew had been injured in the crash, and their ship was badly damaged. They had emergency supplies, but not enough to last long while they waited for a rescue ship that might take months to find them. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, but once they were on the ground they realized it was home to some of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Buddy's species lived in the deep forests and were the top hunters on their world. They were pack animals that worked together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. A single one of them could kill most other creatures, but when they hunted in groups, nothing could escape them. The crashed humans could hear them howling at night and see their glowing eyes watching from the darkness. While his injured crewmates stayed inside their damaged ship, Tay had volunteered to go out and look for fresh water. Their recycling systems had been damaged in the crash, and they would die of thirst before any rescue ship could reach them, even though everyone told him it was suicide. Tay took a small medical kit and some basic tools and headed into the forest. Alone in his second day of searching, Tay found a stream, but he also found something else lying beside it. A young member of Buddy's species was trapped under a fallen tree branch. His leg was badly broken and he had deep cuts from trying to free himself. The creature was probably only a few months old, but he was already the size of a small vehicle. The insane person would have run away as fast as possible, but Tay had grown up on a farm and had always been good with animals. He could see that the young predator was in terrible pain and would die if no one helped him, so instead of running, Tay sat down near the trapped creature and started talking to him in a soft voice. At first the young predator tried to bite and claw at Tay, but he was too weak from his injuries to do much damage. Tay kept talking and slowly began using his medical supplies to clean the creature's wounds. He had to work very carefully because even injured, the young beast was incredibly strong and his claws could easily cut through Tay's protective suit. It took hours of patient work, but finally Tay managed to free the creature from the fallen branch. He splintered the broken leg using materials from his kit and gave the young predator some of his own water. The creature, which Tay started calling Buddy because he reminded him of a dog from his childhood, was too weak to move, so Tay built a small shelter to protect them both for the next 3 days. Tay stayed with Buddy, bringing him water and what little food he could find. The young predator slowly began to trust the strange alien who had saved his life. When Buddy was finally strong enough to stand, Tay expected him to run back to his pack, but instead the creature stayed close to his rescuer. Buddy began following Tay back to the crashed ship, and that was when things got really interesting. The adult members of Buddy's species had been watching the humans since the crash, planning to attack when the aliens were weak enough, but when they saw one of their own traveling with a human, they became confused. They discovered that Buddy's species was not just intelligent but had complex social rules about loyalty and debt. If someone saved your life, you owed them a life debt that could only be repaid by protecting them in return. Buddy had decided that Tay was now part of his pack, and the other predators had to respect that bond. Soon Buddy was bringing Tay food from his own hunts, sharing the fresh meat that kept the human healthy. The young predator also began warning Tay about other dangers on the planet, like poisonous plants and unstable ground. By the time the rescue ship finally arrived 2 months later, Tay and Buddy had become inseparable. Dr. Kilo listened to this story with growing amazement. He had studied animal behavior on dozens off-worlds but had never heard of anything like this. Most predators barely tolerated other members of their own species, let alone forming bonds with aliens from different planets. What made it even more remarkable was that Buddy had chosen to leave his homeworld. When the rescue ship came, he could have stayed with his own kind in the familiar forest, but instead he had followed Tay into the unknown dangers of space travel. The bond between them was so strong that Buddy was willing to give but everything he had ever known. As Tay finished his story, Buddy turned his massive head toward his human companion. The creature's eyes were filled with such obvious love and trust that even Dr. Kilo could see it. The beast gently nuzzled Tay's shoulder with his enormous snout, and Tay scratched behind Buddy's ears in response. Kilo realized he was witnessing something that his species had never experienced. The relationship between Tay and Buddy was not just about training or control, it was a true partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. They had saved each other's lives and created a bond that transcended the normal barriers between species. This understanding changed how Dr. Kilo saw both human and beast. Instead of a dangerous predator being controlled by an alien, he saw two friends who had chosen to face the galaxy together. Dr. Kilo was just finishing his examination of Buddy when the front door of his clinic burst open with such force that it hit the wall and cracked the plaster. His assistant Pip came running into the room, his scales flashing bright red, which meant, "Urgent danger, doctor, we have a big emergency." Pip gasped, trying to catch his breath. A Vorthan battlecruiser just landed at the spaceport and they are bringing wounded soldiers here. Their own medical officer was killed in a fight with space pirates, and they need help right now. Dark Kilo's for hearts all started beating faster at the same time. Vorthans were some of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. They were tall, strong aliens who lived for battle and conquest. Most other species tried to avoid them because Vorthan saw almost everyone else as either enemies to fight or weaklings to ignore. They barely tolerated receiving help from non-Vorthans even when they were dying. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the clinic as the Vorthan soldiers arrived. They were carrying their wounded on metal stretchers and their armor was still smoking from recent combat. Each soldier was nearly 3 meters tall with thick gray skin and sharp teeth that they showed when they were angry or in pain. Their weapons were still attached to their belts and Dr. Kilo could see the energy cells glowing ready for use. Leading the group was a female Vorthan warrior named Kai who had scars covering half her face and arms that showed she had survived many battles. Her eyes were the color of burning coals, and when she looked around the clinic, her expression showed she was not happy about needing help from what she probably considered inferior aliens. Their wounded Vorthans on the stretchers were in bad shape. Dr. Kilo could see plasma burns, energy weapon wounds, and what looked like the results of hand-to-hand combat with space pirates. These were injuries that needed immediate attention or the soldiers would not survive the next few hours. But when Kai and her warriors carried the stretchers into the main treatment area, they immediately saw Buddy sitting calmly on the examination table. The effect was instant and terrifying. Every Vorthan soldier stopped moving and reached for their weapons. At the same time, their warrior training made them see any large predator as a threat that needed to be destroyed immediately. "What is that abomination doing in a medical facility?" Kai snarled in her species' guttural language. Her voice, it sounded like rocks grinding together. "Kill it before it spreads disease or attacks our wounded." The other soldiers started charging their plasma rifles and the air began to smell like ozone and burning metal. Even the wounded Vorthans on the stretchers tried to sit up and grab their sidearms. Despite their serious injuries, they had been trained from birth to fight anything that looked dangerous, and Buddy definitely looked dangerous. Their military conditioning was so strong that they were willing to ignore their pain to eliminate what they saw as a threat. I immediately stepped between Buddy and the angry warriors, holding his hands up in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. "Please," he said in Galactic Standard language, "he is not dangerous to you. He is my companion, and he is here for a medical checkup just like your people." But the Vorthans were not listening to reason. Their culture taught them that showing mercy to predators was a sign of weakness, and weakness meant death on the battlefield. They had spent their entire lives learning to kill anything that might threaten them or their comrades. The idea that such a massive sedator could be safe was completely foreign to their way of thinking. Kai raised her plasma rifle and aimed it directly at Buddy's head. Her finger moved toward the trigger, and Dr. Kilo realized his clinic was about to become a battlefield. The other Vorthan soldiers spread out to get better shooting angles, while the wounded ones managed to pull out their smaller weapons. Buddy sensed the sudden hostility directed at his human friend and rose to his full height on the examination table. His muscles tensed like coiled springs and a low growl began rumbling from deep in his chest. The sound was like distant thunder mixed with the roar of a starship engine. It filled the entire clinic and made the walls vibrate. For the first time since entering the clinic, the Vorthans hesitated slightly. They were brave warriors who had faced death many times, but something about Buddy's growl touched a primitive part of their brains that remembered when their own species had been prey animals. The sound carried promises of violence that even trained soldiers could recognize. Dakio found himself frozen between his oath to help all patients and the very real possibility that everyone in his clinic was about to die. The Vorthans would shoot Buddy and then Tay would probably be killed trying to protect his companion, the wounded soldiers. might die without treatment, and his clinic would be destroyed in the fighting. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like breathing liquid metal. Everyone was poised on the edge of violence, and it would only take one wrong move to turn the medical facility into a war zone. Dr. Kilo could see Buddy's claws extending slightly and knew that the creature was preparing to defend his human friend no matter what the cost. Him seemed to slow down as weapons were aimed and muscles tensed for action. In a few seconds, plasma bolts would start flying, and the peaceful clinic would become a place of death and destruction. But just as Kai began to squeeze her trigger, something unexpected happened that changed everything. The most seriously wounded Vorthan commander, who had been barely conscious on his stretcher, suddenly grabbed Kai's arm with surprising strength. "Wait," he gasped in heavily accented Galactic Standard. Look at the creature's eyes. His voice was weak but carried the authority of someone who had led soldiers into battle for many years despite their reputation as savage fighters. Vorthans were also deeply spiritual people who believed that the eyes were windows to the soul. They thought you could judge any being's true nature by looking into their eyes. Carefully, Kai hesitated with her weapon still aimed at Buddy and followed her commander's gaze. What she saw confused her completely. Instead of the cold, predatory hunger she expected from such a dangerous creature, Buddy's eyes showed intelligence, concern, and most surprisingly genuine worry for the wounded. Vorthan's expression was not that of a killer but of someone who wanted to help. The wounded Vorthan commander named Jox kept his grip on Kiar's arm even though the effort was clearly causing him great pain. His breathing was shallow and labored, but his eyes remained focused on Buddy with an intensity that made everyone in the room pause. Look deeper, Jox whispered to his second-in-command. The beast shows no hunger, no territorial aggression. See how it watches our wounded with concern, not anticipation. A true predator would smell our blood and show excitement. This creature shows something else entirely. Kai lowered her weapon slightly but did not put it away completely. Her warrior training warred with her spiritual beliefs as she studied Buddy's massive form. The creature had not moved from his position on the examination table despite the obvious threat from their weapons. Instead, he seemed to be studying the wounded Vorthans with what could only be described as professional interest. They saw the slight change in the room's atmosphere and made a decision that could either save lives or get everyone killed. He had learned to read Buddy's body language and expressions over their years together, and he could see that his companion was not preparing to attack but rather trying to communicate something important. "Buddy, help," Tay said simply, pointing toward the wounded commander on the stretcher. The words were spoken in the same calm tone he used for all of Buddy's commands, but the effect was immediate and startling. Without any hesitation, Buddy jumped down from the examination table and approached the stretcher carrying Jox. His movements were slow and deliberate, clearly designed to show he meant no harm. The Vorthan soldiers tensed and raised their weapons again, but Kai held up a hand, telling them to wait. The Aquila watched in amazement as Buddy carefully sniffed around the wounded commander. His massive head moved with surprising gentleness as he examined different parts of Jox's body. The creature's nostrils flared as he took in various scents, and his ears moved constantly, picking up sounds that the others could not detect. After a few moments, Buddy stepped back and looked directly at Tay. His expression was urgent and concerned, and he made a soft whining sound that the human had learned meant he had found something important. Tay moved closer to his companion and studied the creature's body language carefully. "He smells internal bleeding," Tay announced to the room, "probably in the lower abdomen based on how he is positioning his nose and the way he keeps looking at that area of the commander's body. Buddy has been trained to detect medical problems, and he is trying to tell us that this soldier needs immediate surgery." Kilo quickly grabbed his medical scanner and ran it over the area that Buddy had indicated. The results made his four eyes widen in shock. There was indeed massive internal hemorrhaging that his initial examination had completely missed. The bleeding was so severe that Jox would have died within the hour if it had not been detected. "How is this possible?" Dr. Kilo muttered as he prepared emergency surgical equipment. "A creature's sense of smell cannot be that precise." Buddy could not only detect the internal bleeding but could pinpoint its exact location better than advanced medical scanners. But Buddy was not finished with his unexpected medical assistance. He moved to the next wounded Vorthan and repeated his careful examination process. This time he placed his massive head against the soldier's chest and listened intently. His ears swiveled like radar dishes as he concentrated on sounds that were too faint for anyone else to hear. Regular heartbeat, Tay translated as Buddy looked at him with another urgent expression. "The heart is not beating in the right pattern, and there might be damage to the chest cavity that we cannot see from the outside." Once again, Dr. Kilo's scanners confirmed what Buddy had detected. The soldier's heart had been damaged by a plasma blast and was beginning to fail. The injury would have been fatal if not caught in time, but the creature's incredible hearing had picked up the subtle changes in rhythm that indicated serious cardiac problems. As Buddy continued his examination of the other wounded Vorthan, he found several more life-threatening conditions that the medical equipment had missed: a collapsed lung that was hidden by armor plating, an infection that was spreading through a soldier's bloodstream, a concussion that was much more serious than it appeared. Each time Buddy detected a problem, he would communicate it to Tay through their own private language of sounds and gestures. Tay would then translate for Dr. Kilo, who would confirm the diagnosis with his instruments every single time. Buddy was correct, and several times his early detection made the difference between life and death of Orcs. Soldiers watched this process with growing amazement. Their warrior culture had taught them to respect strength and skill in battle, but they had never seen anything like this. A creature that could have easily killed them all was instead using his abilities to save their lives. Kai slowly lowered her weapon completely and spoke to her commander in their own language. Jox nodded weakly and replied in Galactic Standard so that everyone could understand. "This beast is not our enemy," he said with obvious effort. "Any creature that tries to heal rather than harm deserves our respect and protection." Dark Hilo found himself working alongside Buddy as they treated the wounded Vorthans. The creatures seemed to understand exactly what was needed and would gently hold patients still during procedures or use his body heat to keep injured soldiers warm. His massive size, which had seemed so threatening before, now became an advantage as he could easily lift and move patients who were too heavy for the smaller aliens. The hours passed. The relationship between the Vorthans and Buddy transformed completely. The warriors began to see him not as a monster but as a fellow protector, someone who used his strength to defend others rather than to dominate them. When one of the wounded soldiers became delirious from pain medication, Buddy lay down beside his stretcher and let the Vorthan rest against his warm furte. Watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He had seen it happen before when other species encountered Buddy for the first time. Fear would turn to curiosity, then to respect, and finally to genuine affection. It was impossible to remain afraid of someone who so clearly wanted to help. By the time the emergency surgery was complete and all the wounded Vorthans were stable, the entire dynamic in the clinic had changed. The warriors who had arrived, ready to kill anything that threatened them, were now treating Buddy like an honored ally. They spoke to him in respectful tones, and several even asked Tay if they could touch the creatures further. Most remarkable moment came when Commander Jox woke up from his surgery and saw Buddy lying peacefully beside his bed. The massive predator had appointed himself as a guard to watch over the recovering warrior. Without hesitation, Jox reached out and placed his hand on Buddy's head in a gesture of gratitude and trust. 6 hours after the emergency surgery ended, all the wounded Vorthans were stable and recovering in the clinic beds that Dr. Kilo had set up in his largest treatment room. The warriors who had arrived ready for battle were now quiet and thoughtful as they watched their comrades heal under the watchful care of both the alien doctor and the massive creature they had tried to kill. Commander Jox was the first to fully wake up from the anesthesia, and when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Buddy lying on the floor beside his bed. The creature's huge head was resting on his paws, but his yellow eyes were alert and watching everything around him. When Jock stirred slightly, Buddy lifted his head and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed both greeting and concern. The wounded commander looked around the room and saw his soldiers receiving the best medical care possible. Dr. Kilo was checking on each patient while his assistant Pip brought them water and food. Tay was helping to adjust their positions so they would be more comfortable, and Buddy was serving as a living blanket for the soldiers who were cold from blood loss and shock. Jox struggled to sit up in his bed despite the pain from his recent surgery and called for Tay to come closer. When the young human approached, the commander began to speak in careful Galactic Standard that was heavily accented. "But understandably must know more about this bond between you and your companion," he said while gesturing toward Buddy. "My people have legends about creatures that could be both protectors and destroyers, but we always thought they were just stories. How did you teach such a predator to heal instead of hunt?" Tay pulled up a chair beside Jox's bed and began to explain the philosophy behind human-animal relationships. "It was not about teaching or training," he said, "but about understanding and respect. Humans did not try to change the nature of their animal companions, but instead found ways to channel their natural instincts toward positive goals." "Buddy is still a predator," Tay explained while scratching behind the creature's ears. "But instead of hunting prey, he now hunts for threats to his family. His protective instincts make him want to keep everyone safe and healthy. He uses his incredible senses to detect medical problems the same way he would have used them to track wounded animals in the wild." Commander Jox listened with growing fascination as Tay described how humans had learned to work with hundreds of different species over the centuries instead of trying to dominate or control other creatures. Humans found ways to create partnerships that benefited everyone involved. They had turned guard animals into police partners, work animals into willing helpers, and even dangerous predators into gentle companions. The other wounded Vorthans had been listening to this conversation and began asking their own questions. Through Kai, who served as translator, they wanted to understand how such a relationship was possible when their own culture taught them that strength must be used to control weakness. But as they watched Buddy interact with everyone in the clinic, they began to see a different kind of strength. The creature could have easily killed anyone in the room, but instead he chose to use his power to protect and comfort. He moved carefully around the wounded soldiers and seemed to understand exactly how much pressure to apply when he rested his head against their bodies to provide warmth. Diakilo observed all of this with professional curiosity and personal amazement. In just one day he had learned more about interspecies relationships than in all his years of veterinary practice. He watched as Buddy helped to him move patients by gently grasping their clothing in his teeth and lifting them without causing any additional pain. The creature's intelligence was obvious in everything he did. He seemed to understand the medical procedures and would anticipate what was needed, often bringing supplies to Dr. Kilo before the doctor even realized he needed them. When one of the Vorthans became agitated due to medication, Buddy would lie down beside him and make soft rumbling sounds that had a calming effect. The day continued. More aliens from the spaceport began visiting the clinic. Word had spread quickly about the human and his remarkable companion. Species that normally avoided each other were gathering in Dr. Kilo's waiting room just to see the creature that could heal as well as hunt. A delegation of elderly Rigelians who were known for their wisdom throughout the galaxy came to observe Buddy and asked Tay questions about human-animal bonding practices. They were followed by a group of young Zent scholars who wanted to document this unique relationship for their research. Each visitor left with a new understanding of what was possible when different species chose to work together, instead of fighting. The fear and suspicion that usually existed between predator and prey species began to break down as they watched Buddy interact gently with everyone he met. Commander Jox made a decision that would surprise everyone in the clinic. He asked Kai to contact their homeworld and request permission to invite Tay and Buddy to visit as honored guests. This was unprecedented in Vorthan history. They had never voluntarily associated with aliens outside of military alliances or trade agreements. The commander explained his reasoning to his surprised warriors. Any species that can turn apex predators into healers deserves our respect and study, he said. These humans have found a way to create peace between natural enemies. If we can learn their methods, we might be able to end some of the conflicts that have plagued our region of space for generations. The response from the Vorthan homeworld came quickly and was even more surprising than Jox's request. The military council not only approved the invitation but asked for detailed reports about human-animal bonding techniques. They wanted to explore whether similar methods could be used to resolve territorial disputes between different Vorthan clans. Dr. Kilo realized that his small clinic had become the center of something much larger than he had expected. As more species learned about Buddy and his relationship with Tay, they began sending representatives to observe and learn. The clinic waiting room became a meeting place where former enemies could sit peacefully together, united in their curiosity about this remarkable partnership. Buddy seemed to understand his new role as an ambassador and took it seriously. He would greet each new visitor with calm dignity and demonstrate his training by following Tay's commands. His gentle behavior with everyone he met helped to break down centuries of prejudice and fear between species. Tay found himself becoming an unofficial teacher as he explained human philosophies about cooperation and mutual respect to audiences of fascinated aliens. He talked about how humans had learned that every species had something valuable to offer, and that diversity made communities stronger rather than weaker. Evening approached and the wounded Vorthans continued their recovery. Dr. Kilo looked around his transformed clinic and realized that everything had changed. What had started as a simple veterinary checkup had become a demonstration of possibilities that most species had never imagined. Buddy settled down in his favorite corner of the clinic, now surrounded by alien patients who saw him as a friend rather than a threat. The massive predator closed his eyes and began to purr softly, creating a sound that somehow made everyone in the room feel safe and peaceful. The galaxy had learned something precious that day about the power of friendship to overcome fear and the amazing things that could happen when different species chose to trust each other instead of fighting.